Why does Djibouti, a small country on the Horn of Africa, host the military forces of more than 5 different countries? Did you know that the United States and China operate bases there within 10 miles of each other? Japan even has a base there. The same Japan that for legal reasons has to designate its military as a self-defense force and cannot legally export weapons. Even Russia tried to build a base there. The fact is, Djibouti is situated on a strategic waterway called the Red Sea. You probably remember hearing about the Red Sea toward the beginning of this year in reference to Yemen and the Houthis. Well, here's why. The Red Sea accounts for 12% of global trade volume. According to a BBC article, this amounts to over $1 trillion. To put that number in perspective, that is about half of the state of Texas's GDP in 2022. The unstable security environment in the Red Sea and Horn of Africa area not only brought the region to the public's attention, but also gave countries an impetus to invest money and manpower in upholding freedom of navigation and security in those waters. In this video, we're going to examine how Djibouti fits into all of this. Before we get started, a quick word from my sponsor, Ground News. If you're like me, you're always consuming news. But in an age of clickbait, media bias, and disinformation, you have to sift through a lot of noise. That's where Ground News comes in. Ground News is an app and website that compares news articles from around the world and allows users to spot media bias and reduce ideological blind spots. You can see a breakdown of how news sources covering a story are slanted politically, reduce blind spots by seeing which stories are underreported by left or right-wing news sources, and customize your feed to see stories that matter to you. For instance, this story about a UN report detailing the Houthis' expanded military capabilities was mostly covered by centrist and left-wing news sources. But this story on hostages still in Hamas captivity was picked up by predominantly right-wing news outlets. Ground News gives me a more complete picture. Click the link in the description box and get 15% off your subscription when you join Ground News today. With my thanks to Ground News, back to the video. In 1888, France established the colony of French Somaliland in the Horn of Africa. In 1892, Djibouti, the largest city in French Somaliland, became the colony's capital. The region was just another battleground in the bigger scramble for Africa, with Italy and the UK also having colonies in the area. Djibouti controls the approaches to the Suez Canal, through which 30% of global container traffic passes, at least when Evergreen isn't blocking it. It is situated near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, separating the Red Sea from the Gulf of Aden. Bab el-Mandeb means Gate of Tears in Arabic, a reference to those who drowned in the earthquake that separated the Arabian Peninsula from the Horn of Africa. More recent events, however, show that the waterway cannot be more appropriately named. In 1958, French Somaliland voted to become a French overseas territory. In a 1967 referendum, the territory voted to remain a part of France and was renamed the Territory of the Afar and the Issas. In 1977, the territory declared independence from France and was renamed Djibouti. So let's talk a little bit about the security situation in the waters off the Horn of Africa. These waters are no stranger to pirate activity, and there is evidence of pirate raids having taken place centuries ago. However, piracy really became an issue within the last couple decades. 2009 and 2010 were the peak years of Somali pirate attacks. More than 4,000 seafarers were fired upon by Somali pirates, and just over 1,000 had been taken hostage in 2010. The root causes of piracy in the region's waters boil down to 3 things: lack of legitimate economic opportunities, the absence of the rule of law, and poor state control over Somalia's landmass. In late 2023, attacks on shipping in the Red Sea by the Iran-backed Houthi militants in Yemen prompted the creation of a US-led naval coalition for the purpose of combating the Houthi threat. The Houthi attacks and the general instability of the region forced cargo vessels to take alternative routes around Africa, driving up insurance costs for these vessels and the cost of everyday goods for consumers. In addition to this, the limited functional capacities of some African ports often forces ships to wait outside the harbor for extended periods of time, and thus making them more attractive targets for pirates. According to an article from the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, 47 African countries have a shared responsibility to keep the seas safe from armed interference for free and safe transit in international waterways. Yet, many African governments are seemingly not taking their national maritime interests seriously, ignoring their obligations under UNCLOS and the multiple conventions regulating safe shipping and international cooperation. Now that we have some context behind Djibouti's strategic importance, let's look at who has what kind of bases there. To put it bluntly, no East African country, including Djibouti, can mount effective anti-piracy operations. Maintaining maritime security and freedom of navigation through these waters has given a handful of countries a reason to keep bases in Djibouti. Let's talk about America's presence in Djibouti. Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti is America's only permanent military base in Africa. It is home to the U.S. Africa Command and was leased to the United States in 2002. The installation previously belonged to the French, who kept French Foreign Legion elements there. Today, the U.S. Navy exercises jurisdiction over the base. I actually have family members who deployed to Djibouti, so I've heard interesting stories from that part of the world. According to Navy.mil, Camp Lemonnier provides, operates, and sustains superior service in support of combat readiness and security of ships, aircraft, detachments, and personnel for regional and combatant command requirements, and enables operations in the Horn of Africa while fostering positive U.S.-African nation relations. It goes on to say, the base supports approximately 4,000 U.S. Joint and Allied Forces military and civilian personnel and U.S. Department of Defense contractors. Additionally, the base provides employment for approximately 1,000 local and third country nation workers. France is another major player in Djibouti. Even after Djibouti declared independence in 1977, the French still maintained a presence there. As mentioned, Camp Lemonnier, named after French General Émile Lemonnier, was previously owned by the French. The 5th Overseas Inter-Arms Regiment, the last combined arms regiment in France's army, is garrisoned in Djibouti. 1,500 French military personnel and civilians reside in Djibouti, and the French contingent there is the largest permanent French force overseas. France has a vested interest in upholding the security of the Red Sea and the waters around the Horn of Africa. 70% of France's imports and 15% of its hydrocarbon needs pass through the nearby Suez Canal. France maintains a naval base at Héron too. Apart from the 5th Overseas Inter-Arms Regiment, the French have artillery, armor, and air assets in Djibouti as well. EU countries like Germany and Spain have contributed forces to augment the French presence in Djibouti. Japan is probably the biggest outlier in Djibouti due to its diplomatic and security policies. In the 2000s, the need arose for a Japanese base there due to ongoing piracy. Japan is particularly vulnerable to supply chain disruptions from piracy in the Gulf of Aden and Indian Ocean. About a fifth of Japan's exported automobiles, a large part of Japan's economy, passes through the Gulf of Aden, and roughly 80% of its oil comes from the Middle East and transits through the Indian Ocean. In 2009, Japan and Djibouti signed a status of forces agreement permitting Japanese troops to be stationed in Djibouti. 2 years later, the Japanese established a permanent base. This is Japan's first foreign military base since 1945. It is home to fewer than 200 troops along with air and naval contingents. A few years ago, the base's facilities were expanded. Italy operates a base in Djibouti as well. This is a logistical base named for Italian military officer Amedeo Gile, the first operational logistical base of the Italian military outside of Italy's borders. The base became operational in 2013 and is considered by Rome as a quote-unquote permanent outpost in an area of enormous strategic importance. This installation is home to a couple hundred Italian personnel, which could possibly include special operations units. China established a base in Djibouti in 2017, which is the PRC's first naval logistics center overseas. Beijing has 2,000 troops stationed in Djibouti, and the base can accommodate an aircraft carrier. The PRC has been engaged in anti-piracy operations off the Horn of Africa for some time. America's and China's bases in Djibouti are less than 10 miles apart. Chinese lasers injured 2 U.S. pilots in May 2018, and Beijing has accused the U.S. of flying spy missions over their military installations. It should also be noted that Saudi Arabia recently concluded an agreement to build a base in Djibouti also. A small country in the Horn of Africa is of disproportionate strategic importance for many countries. Djibouti is situated on a waterway through which a significant portion of global trade passes. Countries ranging from the US to France to Japan have prioritized maritime security and free navigation off the Horn of Africa, to the point where they have all permanently stationed military forces in the region. What do you guys think? Which other waterways carry as much strategic significance as the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden? Which other countries will build bases in Djibouti? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.